I had a splendid voice. In fact, I'd sing in opera if they'd give me my choice. I wrote to Oscar Hammerstein that I would be his star. He said, come down and sing for me, and I'll see how good you are. And I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months. No, I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months. I sang the wise old owl, and he left the room at once. So I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months.
Welcome to episode 5. My guest this week is historian, storyteller and author Jonathan Trigg. To date he has authored 14 history books. Most of the publications are based on the German experiences of World War II, but his latest book, Death in the Fields, the I.R.A and East Tyrone, marks a departure in a very different direction. Anyone who knows me well will tell you I'm a big history buff. I study whatever I can on the conflict in Northern Ireland from 1969 to 1998. I was only too thrilled earlier this year when I came across Jonathan's latest book, Death in the Fields, the I.R.A and East Tyrone, published by Merrion Press. My intrigue lay in the fact that, to my knowledge, that nobody has done such a deep dive in a book detailing the history and activities of the East Tyrone Brigade of the Provisional I.R.A. What I enjoyed the most about Jonathan's book is that it's grounded in fact. There are no half-cocked theories here. It's all fact, and it's laid out in a tight timeline that leaves a lasting impression and a mind full of knowledge. In this episode, Jonathan discusses the reason why he wrote this book. He also speaks about his experience of serving in the East Tyrone area with the British Army in the early 1990s. He also gives his views on Northern Ireland today and what has changed since he first arrived there 30 years ago. To find out more about Jonathan and his book, Death in the Fields, the I.R.A and East Tyrone, you can do so by going to either of the links I have posted in the podcast description. Also, if you like what you hear, please like and share the podcast with anyone who may find this episode of interest. Without further ado, Jonathan Trigg.
So, John, you've come on the show to talk about your latest book, Death in the Fields. What's different about your book compared to, say, other books by historians and storytellers is that you're just not another Brit who takes a notion here, I'm going to write about the Troubles. You actually have experience in this area.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, there's a hell of a lot of books out there, about the Troubles. It sometimes feels that the only thing that's ever happened in Irish history is the Troubles, which clearly just isn't true at all. But yeah, for me, it was personal. Having served in the army, and my first tour in Northern Ireland was East Tyrone, as a young officer. Landing there and getting out on the ground, and knowing from when, I knew I was going to join the army from when I was 11 years old, and for some reason I had no relatives in the military. It wasn't like family tradition, father to son, daddy's a brigadier and all this. There's none of that. It was just for some reason something in my head said, yeah, join the army. And so I tried to join when I was 11. That didn't work out. They said I had to wait a while. How disappointing. And so eventually, I was in. But and also, I knew that not only did I want to join the army, but I wanted to join the infantry. I didn't want to be a pilot or in the Army Air Corps or Royal Engineer or whatever. I wanted to be in the infantry. The idiots that carry heavy weights on their back and trump through water and God knows what else and get filthy and dirty and tired all the time. Don't know again why I wanted to do that, but there you go. And I was a Troubles child. I was born in August 1970, so I knew nothing but the Troubles. Peace on the island of Ireland, I never knew. So I always knew, therefore, if I'm going to join the army, I'll join the infantry. I'm going to serve in Northern Ireland. And then when it actually happened, it was East Tyrone, and at that time they had a well-deserved, the Provisional Brigade there had a very, very well-deserved reputation for being top of their game. So after writing a whole series of books about World War II and a couple of other subjects and so on, it was always there in my mind that I wanted to write. I want to write a series of books on Provisional I.R.A brigades, but it was like where to start. And it was natural. Where to start was start with what you know, and that was East Tyrone.
So I think it's important to kind of for the people who are listening, and it's when we think about conflicts in the world, we think of areas we geographically are not aware of the size of a conflict and how in one another's pockets these conflicts can be. For example, if you're driving up the Shankill Road and you look to the left, pretty much next to it, there's the Divis Towers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think people understand how, or don't know maybe even that how close all this was to one another. Tyrone, you started in East Tyrone. Can you tell us geographically what that was like? Its size, the population. What were you expecting?
Well, you're absolutely right. People think of war and conflict. Well, firstly, they always think it's a long way away. It's benefit of living mostly. I mean, see, I talk outside Northern Ireland now, but most Western societies live in an era of peace, and somewhere they don't have that level of violence. And where there is violence in the world, the scale of it is usually of a different size. So, Democratic Republic of Congo, which has been going through wars the last 20 years, it's basically the size of Western Europe. So that's the size of the place where there's a war going on, and so there's fighting all over. You might be hundreds and hundreds of miles from where the guns are going off. But Northern Ireland isn't like that. Everyone lives cheek by jowl, even where they don't think they do, out in the rural areas and so on. Is that your neighbour maybe if you're a Protestant, they may be Catholic, and vice versa. They might have a completely different view of the world. And East Tyrone is a special place in that way, because when you think of, for instance, of County Armagh, is you've got North Armagh is kind of mainly, and I'm generalising as you've got to do in these sectors, is mainly kind of Protestant, and so on. Of course, Catholics live there as well. But when you go to South Armagh, it is almost predominantly kind of Catholic, and there is that kind of divide. East Tyrone just doesn't have that. The villages are mixed up. So a Catholic village will be next to a Protestant village, and they have completely different sentiments. So you say classically, East Tyrone is small part of the largest of the 6 counties, in the north. It's 2 major towns, Dungannon and Cookstown. Dungannon in the south, Cookstown to the north of it. Their combined population is about the size of Hertford in Hertfordshire. So we're talking small, and the whole of Tyrone is a few 100,000 people, all the way out to Castledeg and Strabane and so on, and all the way through to all the way through past Omer in the centre and in central Tyrone and so on. I mean, there's just it is not a mass population centre. These are small villages, market towns, and so on, and they have that sense of community, but at the same time, they also have a sense of exclusion. You've got to be kind of from that community, and that's from kind of both sides of the of the divide. And you see it in villages, like Coke and Namoy, and so on. So on one side you've got Coke, which is predominantly a Protestant village, and literally right next door is Moy, that's a predominantly Catholic one. And it's so much of that is those communities are intertwined. And what that meant in the Troubles was that you had it was a neighbor versus neighbor kind of war, and that made it personal. I mean, that was researching the book and talking to veterans from all sides, be they RUC, UDR, loyalists, provisionals, officials, and so on. All of them were saying the same thing. It was you could tell it was really personal, because it wasn't, they weren't fighting this faceless behemoth from a million miles away. They were fighting their neighbor, and the guy in that literally 4 fields away. And they knew it, and they all knew who they were in each other, and that has left, it really has left on both sides a legacy of bitterness between it, because as always, neighbour versus neighbour is the most vicious of war. And yes, they were, both sides were fighting for a cause they believed in, but that doesn't mean that at the end of it, if we are at the end of it, that they can just put everything down and we'll all be friends again. That isn't the case. I mean, I'd like to think that they are on the road towards some sort of reconciliation, but I think they're still quite a way away.
You were right, literally in the 90s, which was like the tail end of the Troubles, but at the same time, it was some of the most bitterest attacks on both sides. Like, this is, it was the Republicans were having their attacks, and the Loyalists were actually pushing back very, very strong against them. You exclusively focus on the Provisional I.R.A and the East Tyrone Brigade in particular. Can you tell us what it was about them that, from their initial start back in the 60s and the 70s and on through, what was it about them that was so threatening and so dangerous?
It's a very good question, Vinny. I mean, when the Troubles started in 69, Tyrone, the Tyrone I.R.A, I mean, they were almost wholly kind of official I.R.A, and they stuck with the old leadership, as did much of the rural I.R.A, if I can call it like that. Yeah, the provisional heartlands were Belfast and Derry. That's where they took their time to kind of to bring the old official I.R.A guys out in the countryside, kind of on side. And they did it, as they did in Belfast and Derry, by basically saying, we're the ones who are going to, really stand up. And of course, when the officials then called their ceasefire in 72, if you then wanted to, be part of the armed struggle against the Crown forces and the British and so on, then really, the provisionals were until the arrival of, obviously, Inler and the Irish National Liberation Army, they were your only kind of opportunity to take part in an armed struggle. And that's when things really snowballed in Tyrone. And of course, they had a long history. The I.R.A, as we all know, didn't just appear out of nowhere in 1969. Its history went back, obviously all to the Easter Rising and so on, and resistance against, the British invader, as it's seen, has been going on in Tyrone for centuries before that. Before the plantations in the 1600s, all the way back to the first Anglo-Norman invasions in the late 1100s. So there is a continuity of history that really helped form a solid basis in Tyrone for a kind of a new resurgence of what the I.R.A see as the armed struggle. And that it periodically, look through history, it periodically comes up and so on. It might go dormant for a while. So from the Second World War, for instance, a few quiet years, and then obviously there's the border campaign starting in the late 50s. And then again that goes quiet for about 62, and that's called off, and then the Troubles take off 69, and it starts up again. It's a recurring theme, and of course what a rural place like East Tyrone has is that you have very close-knit communities of families that know each other. They have been farming that same land, living that same village or town land, for decades, if not more, and they're clannish, and because they don't leave their area very much. They keep themselves to themselves. They know everything that happens in their area, and that kind of closeness and linked to the history of the organization and so on makes them almost natural guerrillas in that way. It makes them very suited to it, that's for sure. So when you've got a foundation of the belief that they have, that the rightness of their cause, their almost natural behaviors in terms of knowing what's going on in their area, etc. Add that to, add weaponry in there, and you've and a bit of training, and you've got something, quite deadly. And over time, of course, you get experience, and that is what all units involved in any sort of armed struggle need. You need experience, and of course, come that builds through the late 70s and the 80s and so on, until it reaches its real high point in the kind of mid to late 80s for the East Tyrone Brigade, when they were just, along with South Armagh, the most deadly units the professionals had. And the British Army always recognised that. There's the British Army were by that stage, just as the I.R.A. were at the beginning of the Troubles. They were a bit amateurish in that, because it was a new war for everyone, and no one really knew what they were doing. But by the mid to late 80s, both sides had been at it a long time, and it was professional, if I can put it like that, in a very cold way. When operations happened, they were targeted from both sides. They were targeted, and they would usually end in some poor bugger on each side, being killed. And by that stage as well, the loyalists, who were funny enough. I mean, obviously, well, not funny enough. It's not funny, but you know what I mean. Is that they were the kind of the first in on the act. I mean, there's always this kind of historical thing going. Oh, who was the first? What was the first killings in the Troubles? And for my money, it was a loyalist killing. Guy, it was Belfast guy called Gusty Spence, who then became who killed a Catholic barman, I think Ward. I can't remember his first name. But for me, so it's the loyalists that kind of that drew blood first in that. But then they were in a lot of ways pretty amateurish for a long time. I mean, they were, blimey, when they did carry out things, it was mass casualties. That the Dublin and Monaghan bombings, McGurk's Bar, you name it. I mean, when they did things, unfortunately, a lot of particularly civilians were killed. And I asked Lloyd about saying why were so many for the first 10 years or more, loyalist victims, innocent Catholic civilians, and so on, with no connections to republicanism and so on. And the answer, and I don't wholly believe it, but I do kind of get it to an extent, was that they said that, well, we didn't know who the Republicans were, because we didn't mix with the nationalist communities and so on, so we had no idea who they were. So it was just a case of just hitting anyone we could who we thought might be on that side, and maybe we'd occasionally get lucky, which is a pretty cold-blooded way of looking at it, really. But funny enough, the emergence of Sinn Féin in particular was a boon to the loyalist paramilitaries, because for them, they could then see the guy or the girl standing up with a microphone saying, vote for me in this constituency, for this council election, whatever. Well, they've got a target on their back, and then everyone else around them, working with them, and so on, loyalists to go, right, clock you, and so on. You are a political activist, Sinn Féin activist, which means you're almost certainly, involved in the provisionals. So you are now a viable target. And they started to get better in intelligence. It's taken a long time to do it. They got better weaponry themselves. They never had the scale or sophistication that the provisionals had. But as one of them said to me, we always had enough to kill people. Again, lovely way of putting it. So they had it, and they could use it. And again, by the late 80s, early 90s, they were focusing on East Tyrone as well. And they brought all of that to base. So in the early days, it was the likes of Robin Jackson, the so-called Jackal, who, his targeting was just Catholics, as far as I can tell from the I mean, I've seen nothing evidentiary-wise that would tell me anything more than they were just Catholic civilians, to a lot more targeted operations, such as obviously Balls Bar in 1991. I think they got lucky there, but then when they when they hit Liam Ryan at Battery Bar in Arbo in '89, and of course he was a senior member he was the brigade intelligence officer for the East Tyrone Brigade, and they specifically targeted him, and they also killed an innocent member of the people in the bar as well. But so they were more involved. They started to target more, and it really, it went on from Loughgall, Loughgall onwards. Loughgall kind of, really did, it just for the East Tyrone Brigade, it was that moment. It was the stop moment, and from then onwards, they never stopped fighting. They were always dangerous. But it was really, by that stage, the RUC was a lot better than they ever had been. So was the army. The loyalists were at the top of their game, so to speak, and the brigade was in the firing line.
So, for the benefit of the listeners, those who will be familiar with the history of the Troubles will certainly know Loughgall. I have vague memories of a photograph on the news of the van and the debris. The other photographs I don't think were released until later, but I do have that image in my head. Can you tell us about Loughgall and the preceding events running up to that? Like who was involved? Who was involved? And because a large part of the lethality of the Provisional I.R.A and East Tyrone revolved around this group of men.
Yeah, without that, I mean, the I.R.A, I mean, previous to the Provisionals, had always wanted to go for, and they've done it over time. For instance, the Anglo-Irish War, classic example, and so on, was to clear areas of British presence. In any way, so get the British Army out, get the police out, get anything. And of course, if you can't have the police, you can't have the protection. So, you don't have council authorities, justice of the peace or whatever. When it's all gone, and then the I.R.A can then move in, and in effect, they are the law, and they can govern that area in a quasi way. And then the authorities' only option. The Crown's only option is to go in with massive force in order to reclaim their position. And in those circumstances, and particularly in a modern world, you almost certainly cause, it's that horrible phrase, collateral damage. Collateral damage actually means killing innocent people. And once that's done, and it's all over the news in the media world, and you've lost the. Look at Vietnam. You lose the media world, and then you've lost public opinion. So come the Troubles and the 80s, though there was a team of people in East Tyrone who were determined to, in conjunction with their kind of other comrades in South Armagh and in Fermanagh, to set up kind of what they would call liberated zones along the border, where the run of the government, Northern Ireland, British government and so on, did not run. And for them, the way to do that was to destroy the physical presence in those areas. So it was, particularly blow up police stations, barracks, as they were always known. So blow those up. Most of them were on those border areas were only manned part-time. They weren't full-time police stations. So it's blow them up and then stop them being rebuilt, and so on. In effect, leave them abandoned. So those villagers and farmers and what have you would have to rely on the provisionals for any sort of governance. And they'd started that about 1985, and in East Tyrone, and they've been very successful. The first big one was Ballagawley. Which one East Tyrone volunteer described to me as probably the best operation we ever ran. and it was very well organised and very, very well delivered. And that was, they would had a team, a gun team and a bomb team, and they would wait until the station was closing about 7 o'clock in the evening, and then as the RUC officers went to close up the security gates, because of course it's surrounded by security fencing and so on, a volunteer appeared, shot both RUC officers dead at the gate. Gates open, in the team goes. They spraying the station with gunfire. They take in a beer keg bomb. They grab all the paperwork they can possibly find, for intelligence purposes. Beer keg bomb, light the fuse. Everyone runs off, and so on. Bang. Station's half leveled, and so on. And they've escaped. There's 2 RUC officers dead. No volunteers killed or wounded. Very successful operation. And they then carried out a series of those. There was another one at the Birches, and so on, much the same, but the station actually didn't have any officers in at the time. And at that point, they kind of changed their modus operandi, and instead of a beer keg bomb, they used a JCB digger with a bomb in the the bucket at the front, and that smashed through the security gates up to the wall of the barracks, light the fuse, run off, bang, off it goes, job done. And this was having an effect. The team doing it were called, they got the nickname the A Team, and it wasn't, they didn't give themselves that name, and they actually didn't use it, and they didn't like it, but it was what they were called, and it's after the 1980s, for people of our, I'm sure you're a lot younger than I am, but American TV show and all that type of thing, and the team was, there was kind of a core of 8 of them, but it was, it was a bit fluid, and someone said it could be more, it could be less, depending on the job and what have you, and it had a number of older, more experienced volunteers who were kind of in their early 30s, late 20s, and so we're talking kind of people like Jim Liner, who was actually from Monaghan. He was from Monaghan town. He wasn't from East Tyrone, and there was Podrick McKinney, who was from the Moy, whose elder brother Tommy was serving life in the H blocks, and then you had the Brigade OC himself, which is Paddy Kelly, who was from Lisnahull Estate in Dungannon, and Jerry O'Callaghan, and so on. Those are the older guys, and then you have a number of younger guys, all from the same kind of area. So it was the Kappa Galbally area. So up in the hills of East Tyrone, and that was Tony Gormley, Declan Arthurs, Seamus Donnelly, and so on. Those were the guys, and Eugene Kelly. These were the younger guys who were learning. They'd been on a lot of operations, but they were learning, and they were a tight-knit team, and they knew what they were doing. They were well equipped. They were very, very experienced. And on Friday, the 8th of May, 1987, it was the turn of the RUC station in Lockgall, and the idea was to do a kind of carbon copy of the Birches and so on, but at the same time, in terms of the way they were going to do it, but this time they wanted to make sure they killed some RUC guys. So they had, there was at least 4 vehicles involved. So they had a scout car out front, and the scout car, a couple of guys in it who no weapons, and so on, just a walkie-talkie. So if they get stopped and caught and what have you, well, nothing on me, Governor. What am I going to done for? They have another scout vehicle behind at the rear, exactly the same, catching up the rear in case they need that. And then they have the famous Toyota van, and behind it the JCB digger, which they'd stolen from hijacked from a farm just down the road earlier, taken off, got the bomb in the bucket, all came together as a convoy heading into Lockgall. The majority of the gun team are in the Toyota van. They're all, apart from the 2 in the front, because it would look a bit suspicious, all the guys in the back Everyone's in boiler suits, and they've got, they've put on plimsolls and so on. Most of them wearing marigolds. So it's all for forensics. Guys in the back got balaclavas. Guys in the front don't, because it looks very suspicious if you're driving along in a van, in a balaclava. They come down into the village, and it's a small village. Loch Gall is not big. One main street with as they were coming down into it, the RUC stations on the right, the football grounds, on the left hand side. They went by, checked it out. It's Friday evening. It's about 7 o'clock. It's all quiet. Turned round, another look through, came back, and then there was a bit of a hiatus, and a couple of them thought, this is a bit too quiet. Something doesn't seem right. Let's just call the job off. And a couple of others said, no, rubbish. Come on, we're here. You're getting the heebie-jeebies. Let's just do it. So they said, right, fine, we'll do it. So scout cars are then left to wait, because they're going to be the getaway vehicles. And the Toyota van drives back down to the IC station, followed by the digger. Toyota van drives a bit past it, stops. Gun team start to get out, as the JCB then pulls a big right, bang, straight into the security gates, light the fuse, and so on. Guys jump off, start to run away. Gun team open up on the station, and then all hell gets let loose, because what they weren't expecting was that in the actual station was an SAS team, an ambush team, who were waiting for them, and who just unleashed a torrent of fire. And I mean, obviously I've been there and walked around, and it's point blank. In weaponry terms, I mean, the type of a modern assault weapons are targeted really to operate at about 300 meters, and be truly lethal at that range. And in Loch Gall, it's 20, 25 meters, and at that range, it's just. I mean, I can't imagine just how horrific that was. It was pretty much over in a couple of minutes. Absolute blast of fire, and all 8 of the volunteers were killed. Unfortunately, I mean, which is a tragedy in itself in lots of ways for the families, of course. But unfortunately, an innocent civilian. It's Anthony Hughes. I again, apologies, because there was 2 brothers, Anthony and Oliver, in the same car. They were mechanics, and they were wearing overalls, and they were just wrong time, wrong place. And unfortunately, the SAS thought that they were involved. They opened fire on the vehicle as well. One of the brothers was killed. The other one was extremely badly injured, which is horrific, absolutely horrific. I feel so sorry for the Hughes family. It's utterly dreadful. But yeah, and then it was over, and then it is just clouds of cordite, cartridge cases all over the place, and all of a sudden the A team, the East Tyrone's best, were gone, and that was a absolute hammer blow to the brigade.
It's what's referred to, and it's accurate too. It was the worst loss by the Provisional I.R.A in the entire conflict. They lost 8 volunteers in one go.
Yes, and it was the worst loss by the I.R.A, not just the provisionals or the officials or whatever, since Clonmalt back in 21, I think it was. So it was horrific. It was absolutely horrific, and to lose, that amount of experience that they had, the team that was really kind of leading, because the I.R.A was always, it's a minority sport. They may have had quite a lot of passive support, so people would vote for Sinn Féin and so on. But voting for Sinn Féin in those days did not equate to I'm a card-carrying member of the I.R.A that has an Armalite tucked down my pocket. No, not at all. There's always different levels of support. So you get an awful lot of nationalists who would vote for Sinn Féin, who would never think of being any part of being the I.R.A. or being even a passive supporter and so on. They may they may be a bit half-hearted on it, and there will be a lot of members of the I.R.A. or kind of auxiliaries, as the I.R.A. would see them, who would provide a safe house. They might store a weapon, or they might drive a car, or they might give a bit of intelligence. But the thought of actually pulling the trigger and killing someone, particularly at close range, or pressing the button and blowing someone up, no, that's there are very few people who would take that step, and the A-team were the cream of them for East I.R.A.
You mentioned liberated zones, and more of a hypothetical question than a factual question, but just suppose Lochgall had never happened, and the A-team, as they were known, had they decided to pull out before they went into the village. They taught them something wrong and went away, went back and continued this mission for liberated zones. How would that affect the area? Like, hypothetically speaking, what could we expect in these liberated zones had this plan succeeded?
If the plan had succeeded, then it really would have been, if you wanted someone had broken into your house, and you knew it was David down the road or Jimmy down the road or whatever, because in most of these communities, of course, because they are very, very tight knit, they'd know this sort of thing, and they'd know if a burglary's been done, it's David down the road. He's the wrong one, and so is that they would have gone to the local I.R.A. commander. So they wouldn't have gone to the police, because the police wouldn't have been there, and they wouldn't have relied on the court system to do it. They'll have gone to the local I.R.A. commander and said, I've had my telly nicked, and it's David, and it's I know it's David. I want it sorted out, and so on. In which case, David probably would have ended up, either taking a hammering from a bunch of guys one Friday night, or maybe even getting kneecapped. And so that would have been the way that justice was done, and that's the way those communities then would have had really no choice but to turn away from normal administration, but in a relatively for a relatively short period of time, because clearly there is no way that any functioning democratic government, and the British government in that way was no different, could have allowed those circumstances to operate in any sort of significant way. I mean, there was always an element of that going on at the time. I mean, if you lived in a loyalist housing estate, you lived in Sandy Row in Belfast and West Belfast and what have you, and you got burgled and so on, chances are you go to the local UDA commander and say, come on, it's David, I want something done, and that wasn't a liberation zone. It was just the way that things were done. But in those circumstances where, because the provisionals would have absolutely milked it in propaganda terms, so they would have had I.R.A. guys in balaclavas and weapons doing vehicle checkpoints up and down high streets in the middle of the day, and acting the role of local officials and so on, and then broadcasting it out to the world.
It did happen. Carrickmore, was it not? In
Carrickmore, classic example, and there always was because they knew the value of propaganda material. But in a liberated zone, they would have been able to do far more. So it wouldn't have just been a camera following 4 balaclava guys with AKs walking down a street for a while and then disappearing. They would have been far more open, far more structured about it. It would have been, they would have had videos of queues outside a council office, so to speak, or whatever, with locals reporting incidents to the local I.R.A. and so making it look as though they were the local government. And of course, there's no way that UK government would have allowed that. So it would have been.
I'd be just curious, because I am a teacher. I would be interested in how would education be administered in that particular situation. That's
a really interesting question, to be honest, Vinny, because the honest answer is I've got no idea. Because how would, for instance, in those circumstances, I can't imagine that the provisionals would have got involved, for instance, in the local Catholic schools. They would have gone in and seen the headmaster or headmistress, and I'm sure they would have said, look, as far as you're concerned, you might be getting paid by local authority, local education authority, whatever it is, but we're kind of here now. Just so you know, if there's any trouble, you tell us, etc., etc. But they're not going to walk into a Protestant school, and do that and so on, because of course in those liberated zones there'll be Protestant housing and Protestant villages, and there lay the seeds of, going back to your question about what would have happened. Those areas, it would have they'd have just stopped and just armed themselves. They're bound to be UDR and RUC members there who've got guns, and they'd be like saying, we are under threat. We can't live like this. And then you've got a mini civil war, going on in your backyard. And as the UK government, you then got to step in, and all of a sudden things have flared up from individual attacks on off-duty UDR, or loyalist attacks on Catholic shop owners, or whatever it is, to village versus village, almost gun battles in the high street, those things spiral out of control incredibly quickly. I mean, this is, as you say, it's hypothetical. If Lockgall had been called off, I'm absolutely sure the same end result would have happened somewhere else fairly quickly afterwards, because by then the brigade was riddled with informers. It really was, and the level of surveillance, particularly technical surveillance, on the brigade. So almost like it wasn't a case of, the bogeyman for republicanism has always been the informer, the tout. It always has been and always will be, I'm sure. But you only have to watch modern films now, and they've got spy satellites looking down and seeing how many cups of how many sugars you put in your tea, and so on. What that level wasn't available then, and so on. But at the same time, the level of surveillance that was available was incredible.
Because you mentioned something very interesting there earlier on. You described the team.
Yes.
So there was 8 men who did the attack, but they had 2 cars, one at the front and one at the back.
Yeah.
So that's that's nearly 12 people.
Yes.
So
at least.
And then on top of that, you'd have some sort of a support network as well, of people who would have to go and get them the guns, places where they can go, all that sort of escape routes, the whole lot. So that's probably another 10 people on top of that who would have maybe not known where it was happening, but something was going to happen. And probably on top of that, like you're saying, surveillance and intelligence had gotten so strong. The RUC and the British Army have become so adept at getting the intelligence. Had something been happening, it would have been picked up very quickly.
But you're absolutely right. That's it. That the dozen or so guys actually on the attack themselves, the hit team and the scouts and so on, are they're a relatively small part of the whole setup, because they've got the farm, the Mackles farm, a few miles away, where they'd hijacked the JCB digger. Is that there's a they'd left a couple of guys there to basically make sure the Mackles didn't raise the alarm that the Provisional I.R.A had taken their digger, because of course that if they'd reported that. And so on, intelligent ring. Oh my God! Here we go. We've got another Birches. Digger's gone. They're going to be, and they're not going to be driving, 80 miles to blow it. It's going to be a station that's very close to there. They had some guys that stole the high ace van earlier in the day from premises in Dungannon. They'd have had a team around it, and like you say, a team that brought the guns up. They also had another team that were waiting down on the border. So after the attack, they then scoot to the border as quick as possible, throw them the weapons and all of their overalls and all that sort of stuff. They could be burnt, and obviously not the weapons, they don't want to burn those, but burn all of the shoes, balaclavas, and so get rid of forensics. And so that's their job. And they've got other guys who are then right over the border, might take you to Monaghan for a great weekend of celebration and so on. And you add it all up, and of course they wouldn't know. None of them would know. They'd just be told, right, you need to take, go to this weapons cache, pick up, what's in there, which is 2 assault rifles and so on, and then take it to this location, leave it there, and go. That's your job. Or you need to get to the Mackles farm. It's this address, and your job is to make sure don't hurt anyone, but just keep the family there until 8 o'clock that night, and then your job is to go. And you add it all up, and you go, actually, there's probably 30 at least, involved, if not more. Relatively few will know the details of the plan, but there's that number involved, and of course, one, it points to how many people were involved in a detailed operation like that, but also just where the information can come from. So in the intelligence guys, like the special branch, who were really leading on the intelligence side by that stage of the war, it was for them. They always described it as a jigsaw. They said you never have one person that would say, right, it's going to happen entirely like this and lay out the whole plan and so on. No, it was what you get is just 100 little pieces that would just fit together in some sort of way, and you'd have to use your knowledge and the analysis and so on, and think, right, in all probability and likelihood, it's going to be this, and then you take a calculated risk. Log Gall's a classic. There's lots of suppositions afterwards going, they thought it might be, the Brits thought it might be 3 or 4 stations or whatever, so they had ambushes at all of them. And you go, that's just not feasible, because first, the SS isn't that big, and so on. And mounting that sort of operation over more than one area is impossible. And so on. You've got to be able to kind of hone it down. So you take an element of risk that we think it's going to be this, but you don't 100% know in most circumstances. But the level of intelligence that they had, if the weapons are jarked and so on in the terminology, which means they had some sort of tracking device on them, you can track those weapons. Then all of a sudden you go, right, they're going towards this area. That's where we need to focus our effort. But of course, you've got to be there in front of them. That was the whole thing. So a lot of the kind of last minute intelligence confirms your earlier view, but you've got to come to a view a few days before that this is going to happen, and we think it's going to happen here, and so that's where we've got to prepare.
So you arrived a couple of years after Loch Gall had happened, and in your duty in the British Army, you would have met suspects, volunteers on a regular basis, if not a daily basis.
Yeah.
What was their reaction, I suppose, to you? And is there a common factor that you noticed across the board? Because people generally tend to think that the people who get involved in these conflicts are just, argumentative Neanderthals. But if you study what is going on and the people behind it, it's very far from it. In another life, in another time, they could have been a captain of industry. But there's traits there. Like, you're not talking about stupid people. You're talking about highly intelligent people.
The fact of the matter is that you will always get on every on every side of a war. You will get the odd psychopathic Neanderthal, be it in the British Army, the RUC, Provisional I.R.A, Loyalist paramilitaries, UDR, whatever. All military organisations try their best to weed them out, and I include obviously paramilitary organisations in that, because they are, in majority of circumstances, they're incredibly unhelpful, but you always get a few through. But they are a minority. What you get in most organisations, and Provisional I.R.A is no different from that, is that the majority of individuals involved do so because they believe in it. They do have a certain line, some more than others. Volunteers themselves will say, such and such and such so and so, they were really ideologically committed, and they were, etc. Whereas, I was less so, but I thought it was important, etc. And then you get, over a period of time in particular, the kind of, and again, I generalize massively, is that those who perhaps are less professional, less technically proficient, then get kind of weeded out. Either, unfortunately, they get killed or what have you, or more than likely, again from a paramilitary side, is that they'll get caught, arrested, and sent to prison. And then over time, that selection process works. It's almost like a pyramid, until you get a series of individuals. And this was most definitely the case in the by the mid to late 80s. The individuals involved are relatively few, but they know their stuff. Now the younger guys, they won't know as much, but they're learning, and they're learning from the older guys who've been doing it for a long time. The 18 classic example, the likes of Patrick Kelly and Podrick McKinney and Jim Liner are teaching Seamus Donnelly, Eugene Kelly, Declan Arthurs, for when it's their turn to take over. The kind of the reins of command them to become the senior guys. And the British Army always. I mean, I was very clear. We were, before we went over for a 6-month emergency tour to Northern Ireland, we were training for 6 months, and it was taken massively seriously. This was no game. This was no joke. This wasn't, oh, don't worry, lads, we're professional soldiers and they're a bunch of dumb paddies. No, that was never the basis. It was these guys. You might not like what they do and what have you, but you've got to respect. You've got to respect them and respect the way they go about their business, and you've got to be at the top of your game. And if you're not, then either you, or even worse, you're going to get some of your men killed. So you have really got to, and it was drummed into us. The training was relentless, and at a very, very high level. And of course, the agencies that were brought to bear from the British government, be they specialists such as 14 Intelligence Company, who were surveillance specialists and so on, to the likes of MI5 and etc. We're talking about organisations with a lot of resources, but also a hell of a lot of expertise. All focused on trying to defeat the Provisional I.R.A was the most successful paramilitary organisation in Western Europe. There's no getting around that. It was tough. It was very, very tough. And no one that I ever served with ever took it lightly, or took the provisionals lightly. No one swagging around saying, "Oh, they're a bunch of idiots," and so on, because they weren't.
Okay, I'm going to leave you on this one question. We are, last week there was, you may or may not have heard of it, there was a festival in Belfast where they had a folk band, a Republican folk band called the Wolf Tones. And
I've heard of that,
yeah. And they are what they are, but again, the media is in an uproar because a lot of people there were chanting "I.R.A, up the Ra."
Yeah.
Now, that's not the first time that this furore has happened. It happened last year, but previous to that, there was the Unionists and Loyalists sniping at the Republicans and the Nationalists because of commemorations for fallen volunteers. One side was saying they shouldn't do it, and then the one side that was saying they shouldn't do it, they were showing up for commemorations for their own volunteers. And then we go back again to say, well, really, there was marching season, you name it, bonfires, bands, the whole lot. To both sides of the border, after 25 years of peace, it doesn't feel as if anything has changed. However, you, in your research for the book, came back to Northern Ireland, and you must have witnessed some change that we're not seeing.
I mean, it's an interesting. I mean, obviously, I read that, and I remember there was a think it was an Irish football, a ladies football
Yeah.
team, and they were doing the RA. I mean, I take all that stuff with a bit of a pinch of salt, and I think sometimes, kind of maybe people from both sides use that as a bit of a dog whistle to rile their own supporters up and so on. I mean, I think it's all a bit silly. The bonfires and all that type of thing. I wish to God we'd have moved on beyond that by now. I mean, I get community events, and I get bonfires. I get a bonfire night on Guy Fawkes and so on, and so on. But of course, it's not the same, and it's still seen as there's too much glorification of the divide still, which I find after, as you said, 25 years of the Good Friday Agreement, I find just, a bit head scratching. I mean, when I went over, for my research trips, is that the first things that always struck me was just how prosperous actually everything looks. I mean, God, roads in Northern Ireland are so much better than ours. Over here, and everything's clean and it seems to work, and and everything does look, very well. But like I said, scratch the surface and talk to the people. And again, a lot of the people that I met over there were, they were like saying, "Oh, I'm so glad it's over and it has changed, and we're just getting on with life and so on." A lot of the, if I can call them, kind of veterans, particularly kind of, UDR and provisionals. Loyalists less so, actually, which is quite an interesting one. I thought they'd be much more kind of, into it than they were. But UDR and provisionals in particular felt very keenly that neither of them had got what they had fought for, if I can put it like that.
Mm-hmm.
And were, they weren't. None of them were kind of going, "Oh God, I want to pick up a gun and go and do it again." But I didn't get the feeling that it would take that much for them to kind of to get back to that position. But life felt in general a lot more normal. I mean, biggest things obviously for me was I didn't see soldiers walking up and down the street carrying assault rifles. Which for me was absolutely part and parcel of being there. I mean, I remember we won one of our first patrols, and we were helicopter couldn't come and get us out because we had to tab back into Dungannon, and we were on Castle Hill, and it's a Saturday, kind of afternoon shopping day and what have you, and I'm going up the high street, and I caught myself looking in. I was looking Woolworths. That ages me. So I'm looking at Woolworths shop front window, and there's a load of people on the pick and mix. I love Woolworths pick and mix. It's one thing I really missed from old Woolies. And there I'm wearing full combats, helmet, camouflage cream, webbing on, rifle magazines, all this type of thing. I've got an assault rifle, and I'm walking up there, and no one is paying a blind bit of notice to me. I might as well not have existed, and so on. And they're all just chatting, in my language. So I can understand everything they're saying, and it was just one of the weirdest feelings I've ever had in my life. But going back on the research trips, there's none of that now. The barracks are gone, the checkpoints are gone. You don't see the soldiers, and that is gratifying. That is progress. I just wish there'd maybe been a bit more in terms of the community stuff. I mean, the wolf tones. I mean, they are what they are, and so on. It's not my type of music, frankly. But I'm more a Smiths man, if that's anything. But again, that probably dates me as well. I think it's got better. It's not got nearly, as far. It's not got better as I'd have wished at this stage. Because at this rate of progress, it's going to be, I don't know, 2,000 and 100 million before they stop lighting bonfires and what have you. But maybe it's a generational thing. I mean, I don't, seeing the John Colwell getting shot in Omagh and so on. That kind of thing is, because that seems, and I've got no information on that at all, apart from what I've heard on the news, like everyone else. But that does seem to be a conjunction between dissident Republicans and organised crime. To get rid of a common enemy who's been a pain in the arse, and that kind of thing is worrying. Less so the wolf tones and up the I.R.A and whatever. But it's symptomatic. It's of a society that still hasn't found a way of healing yet. And maybe it's generational, Vinny. I mean, God, I hope so.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was a child of the Troubles. Talk to my kids now, and they have absolutely no idea what the hell I'm talking about. For them and they're in their 20s, but for them it means absolutely nothing, which is great. I deem that as success. I mean, I want them to know, because as we said, if you don't recognise history, you're doomed to repeat it. But I think it's great that they just don't worry about it, and I wish it was the case in Northern Ireland too.
So that wraps up this episode. A big thank you to Jonathan Trigg for taking time out of his busy schedule to talk to me. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like it and share it with anyone that you might think would be interested in its contents. We're back next Friday with a brand new episode. Until then, you've been listening to the Recluse's Cookbook. I'm your host, Vinny McHale.
My mother always told me that I had a splendid voice. In fact, I'd sing in opera if they'd give me my choice. I wrote to Oscar Hammerstein that I would be his star. He said, come down and sing for me, and I'll see how good you are. And I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months. No, I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months. I sang the wise old owl, and he left the room at once. So I don't suppose I'll do it again for months and months and months.